Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone and welcome back. This video is part 2 of question number 16, chapter number 6 problem that we were doing in the last, we were covering in the last video. So in part 1 we covered to generate a vector of 20 random integer elements with that were in the range of 10 to 30, and this was the syntax that we wrote. In order to generate a 1 by 20 row vector. Now please make note that every time you run this command, the vector x will have entirely different set of elements. Mind you, because it's random, hence the vector that is generated right now is a bit different from the one that you had in the previous video. Also within this video, if I rerun this command, rerun the program, you will get to see entirely different set of values. That is the whole purpose of the function rand_i. Anyway, now let's read ahead. So the second part says is that you are to replace all the elements that are not even integers. That means that are odd integers. So replace them. So if the elements are even, don't do anything. If the elements are odd, replace them again with random integers that are between 10 and 30. Fine. And repeat B until all the elements are even integers. So we need to make sure that all the elements in the vector x are even. Now every time I will replace the number, the odd number with another random number, that random number can be even an even number or an odd number. But you need to ensure that you need to repeat the step as many times till your odd number is replaced by a perfectly even number. Now when it comes to even numbers, we all know that all the even numbers are divisible by 2. And what is the divisibility check? That if you talk about any number, for example 16, this number is an even number, and if you check its divisibility with respect to 2, you will see that it's perfectly divisible by 2, hence the number 16 is an even number. On the contrary, if you check odd numbers, for example 15, let's suppose, and if we check its divisibility with respect to 2, you will get to see any non-zero number. So any non-zero remainder is indicating with respect to the divisor 2, it is indicating that this number is an odd number. Now keeping this thing in mind, we are going to check one element, one by one, all the elements. Now how many elements are there? There are 20 such elements. So we'll be checking each element one by one. And every time we find a number not to be divisible by 2, that means it's an odd integer. And every time we find an odd integer, we are going to replace it with another random number. And another random number may be an even number or an odd number, but we need to make sure that we need to replace it with an even number. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to apply a for loop. Now why for loop? Because I'm going to check about that each element. How many elements are there? 20 elements. I need to check all the 20 elements are even. Because I know how many times I have to check, I'll go for the for loop. And looping in the first place, because I don't have to check only once, I have to check 20 times. Hence the loop. So which loop? For loop, because I know that I have to repeat on checking for example 20 number of times, where 20 is the element size or the number of elements in the given vector x. Fine. Now moving on, you need to make sure that for every for there is a corresponding end in order to remove this red color underline. Now what next? For k key value 1, so mind you, k key value will begin from 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 20. So for the first pass, when k key value is 1, you need to check if it is divisible by 2. And what is the divisibility check? I told you the divisibility check is with respect to 2. Now if it is already divisible by 2, that means if its remainder is equal to 0, you need not to do anything, you need not to replace it. But if it is not equal to 0, you're required to change the number. So what you're supposed to do is, this is a conditional expression, right? So you need to keep on changing the value of x, right? You need to keep on changing the value of x till this remainder becomes equal to 0. So now here, this is a conditional expression, and because we do not know how many times later will the number be replaced by an even number. Therefore, within the loop, I'm using a nested while loop. Within the for loop, I'm using a nested while loop. Why? Because I don't know how many times later will I get an even number, because random number rand I is going to generate a random number. Like I said, it may not be an even number. So what I will do next is I will replace the kth number if it is not divisible by divisible by 2. If its remainder is not equal to 0, I will replace it with yet another random number which is within the range of 10 and 30. Now, so what will happen is it will keep on changing till this condition becomes false. Fine. So if this is for example, let's suppose 15, right? So 15 ka remainder with respect to 2 is not equal to 0. Since it is not equal to 0, it will reassign the value. Then if it will reassign to value, for example, 16. Now check, is 16 the remainder of 16 with respect to 2 equal to 0? Yes. At that moment, this condition will become false and your loop will stop. So the kth position of x will have the value of 16, which is an even number. Now, since it is giving an error, it's giving an error. Why? Because like I said, for every for, there has to be a corresponding end. Similarly, for every while, there has to be a corresponding end. And this red color's error has been omitted. Now, let's read through. The question says that the program should also count how many times b is repeated before all the elements are even integers. So we need to do this also. We need to do this additionally. That is, not only we have to replace x, right? Replace those odd integers. We also have to define how many times the replacement was done. So for example, if we come outside the loop so far, after assigning the value of x, the elements of x, we have not have outside the loop, the replacements done are 0, right? Now within the loop, for example, after changing, if this condition is true, right? If this condition is true, that means if it's an odd integer. So what will happen is the replacement will be done. So every time the replacement will be done, you need to add a counter, say add a counter to n. So for example, if the first element is, let's suppose, here, if the first element is 11, right? So 11 will need to be changed. So when the first time it happens and 11 changes to 13, right? So the n will become how? N will become 0 plus 1. So n is right, n is here 1. Now, for example, n got replaced with 13. 13 is again odd number will again be replaced by another integer number. Then the counter of n will be 1 plus 1, so that means 2. So that means so far 2 replacements have been done. Now next time, for example, if 13 gets replaced with 14, right? Now 14 is now divisible by 2, hence this condition will become false, and then it will no longer run any checks, right? It will no longer enter the while loop. So what I'll do is I'll put a suppressor here, I'll put a suppressor here, and at the end the question is expecting to return an answer like, when done the program displays the vector, the modified vector, and a statement that states how many iterations were needed for generating the vector. So n is that number of iterations. So what we can do is we can make use of fprintf and %i, because I it's a format specifier for integer. Iterations were done, right? And also come outside the loop and ask it to display the vector x. So you will get to see the unmodified, the initial x, and then the modified x. Fine, were done. %i iterations were done. That's it, I guess. Here we go. So let's run the program. Clear all CLC. Here we go. It did not display x. Wait a minute. Okay, sorry. So here k, I detected my mistake. This is not k here, it is actually array addressing like this. So x is a vector, right? So I need to address that very vector which is x. So the kth element of x. So for example, when the first pass, for the first pass, the value of k will be 1. So here the changes that I made are the first element of x in the first pass, the second value of the second element of x in the second pass, so on and so forth. So I need to check each value of x, right? So hence the changes were made here anyhow. So that very element, element of x will be changed, which is again an odd integer, hence its remainder with respect to 2 is not equal to 0. And every time that is done, reassign a value up until this condition becomes false. When this condition becomes false, that means that your number is actually an even number. So now let's run it and we'll get to see. So this is our x, the original x. The original x had 20. The original x has 26, even, second even, third even, fourth even, but the fifth number is not even, it was odd. So noticed in the modified vector x, 21 has been replaced with 20, which is an even number. 18, 12 and 18 same, 16, 10 same, but 25 has been replaced with 14, which is an even number. So n will tell you how many iterations, how many times this had to be done, how many replacements had been done. So n is telling you that there were how many iterations? 13 times the loop was repeated. Now make sure that when you will rerun the program, notice please, let me open this script file in front of you. When I'll rerun the program, notice that the iterations number will keep on changing, but the modified vector x, in the modified vector of x, you will get to see all even numbers. Fine, that's it, that's all.